There are names that inspire hope, others that command respect, and then there are names that send a chill down the spine. Darth Vader belongs to the last. His name alone is enough to silence a room, to stop a rebellion before it starts, to turn defiance into fear. He is not simply a man. He is a presence, a force that lingers in the shadows of history, spoken of in hushed tones even decades after his fall. The mechanical breath, the slow, deliberate movements, the cold, artificial voice. Everything about him is designed to strip away the illusion of control. For 20 years, he was the unseen hand that shaped the galaxy, the dark specter that loomed over both friend and foe alike. Before Vader, warlords and tyrants fought for power, but their reigns were fleeting, their legacies fragile. He was different. He did not demand loyalty, he took it. He did not threaten, he acted. There was no need for long-winded speeches or elaborate schemes. When Darth Vader arrived, resistance ended. When his ship entered a system, entire planets surrendered without a shot fired. What could blasters do against a man who could rip steel apart with a gesture? What hope did any soldier have against an enemy who could end a life with a mere thought? He was power-given form, the will of the Emperor made flesh. Those who saw him in battle did not see a warrior, they saw inevitability. The black armor was not just a symbol, it was a statement. Every movement carried the weight of the past. Every step echoed with the consequences of a fallen republic. The Sith had always lurked in the shadows, manipulating, waiting for the right moment. But with Vader, they stepped into the light. There was no more deception, no more subtlety. He was the blunt instrument that wiped away the remnants of the Jedi, the enforcer of a new age, the executioner of the old ways. Every strike of his crimson blade carried finality. When the Empire rose, there was no negotiation, no debate, only the certainty that those who stood against it would not stand for long. Some whispered that he was more machine than man, a being rebuilt from the ruins of something greater. Others believed he had been born into darkness, a creature of pure malevolence. The truth was buried beneath layers of myth and silence, but one fact remained unchanged. Wherever Vader walked, fear followed. His presence alone shattered illusions of rebellion. There were stories of planetary leaders who swore allegiance to the Empire at the mere mention of his arrival. Governors who had once stood defiant surrendered the moment they saw the triangular silhouette of a star destroyer piercing the sky, knowing what it meant. The Sith Lords of old had sought power through deception, through corruption, through political maneuvering. Vader had no patience for such games. His power was direct, absolute, unquestionable. There were no secret deals, no hidden agendas. His method was the simplest and the most effective, unrelenting force. Even among the Imperial ranks, officers tread carefully in his presence. The slightest sign of failure could result in a hand raised, a throat tightened, a life ended. There was no plea for mercy, no second chances. He did not need to speak his orders twice. The fear of his wrath was enough to ensure obedience. Yet for all his authority, he was no mere enforcer. He was something more. The Emperor had many tools, many commanders, many strategists, but only one Vader. He was not just a weapon, he was the foundation upon which the Empire's dominance rested. The Death Star, the legions of stormtroopers, the endless fleet of star destroyers, these were impressive, but none inspired terror the way he did. They could be destroyed, rebuilt, replaced. But Vader was irreplaceable. The Emperor had many admirals, many generals, but only one shadow. Some saw him as a monster, others as a necessary force. There were whispers that even within the Empire, there were those who wished to see him fall. A leader with too much power is always a danger, even to those he serves. But no one dared to act. The few who tried never had the chance to regret it. Vader's enemies did not disappear quietly. Their fates were left as examples, their screams echoing in the halls of Imperial strongholds, their names erased from records as if they had never existed. His legend grew with every battle, every execution, every whispered story. The rebellion feared him above all others, not because he commanded armies, but because he did not need them. A squadron of X-Wings could take down a Star Destroyer, but what pilot could best him in the cockpit? A platoon of soldiers could take a base, but who could stand against a Sith Lord in combat? He was the blade in the darkness, the figure standing amidst the wreckage of warships, the lone silhouette against the fire and ruin of another failed uprising. For 20 years, his existence shaped the course of history. It was said that he could sense a lie before it was spoken, that his presence alone could strip the will from even the bravest warrior. His power was not only in his strength, but in his certainty. There was no hesitation, no question. He did not wonder if he was right. He simply acted. The weight of morality, of regret, of guilt, those belonged to others. He had shed them long ago, buried beneath Durasteel and circuitry, replaced with something colder, something unbreakable. But history is not kind, and power is never eternal. The machine that had carried him through decades of war, of oppression, of victory, was beginning to falter. The certainty that had defined him was cracking. The very thing that made him unstoppable, his singular focus, his absolute devotion, was beginning to shift. In the darkest corners of his mind, something stirred. The whispers of a name long buried, the ghost of a past he had tried to destroy. And soon, that past would come for him. The galaxy would never forget Darth Vader. But for the first time in decades, the question was no longer about what he could destroy. It was about what remained beneath the mask. Anakin Skywalker was never meant to be. His birth defied reason, a mystery even to the Jedi, a scar upon the fabric of the Force. His mother, Shmi Skywalker, spoke of no father, no conception she could explain, only that he was there, growing inside her, as if willed into existence. The Jedi, sworn to seek knowledge, found no answer. Some whispered of prophecy, others of warning. Whatever he was, the Force had spoken, and its message was unclear. Prophecy was dangerous. The Jedi spoke of balance, of a chosen one destined to restore harmony, but their understanding of that destiny was flawed. Ancient texts hinted at a being who would change the course of history, yet the details were buried in riddles. Anakin's existence was either salvation or doom. The Jedi sensed the potential within him, but behind their curiosity, there was hesitation. The Force had never created something without purpose, but purpose does not always mean peace. There were other possibilities. The Sith had spent centuries searching for ways to manipulate life itself. Darth Plagueis, one of their most cunning lords, had devoted his studies to bending the midichlorians to his will, seeking the power to create and sustain life. If his experiments had succeeded, what had he unleashed? A child born without a father, a being of immeasurable power. Had the Sith unwittingly sown the seeds of their own destruction, or had the Force answered their corruption with a creation of its own? Either way, Anakin's birth was an act of war. On Tatooine, his abilities were more than just remarkable. They were unnatural. He could see beyond the present, sense dangers before they happened. His hands built machines with an understanding no child should possess. His reflexes defied explanation, allowing him to race through the canyons at speeds no human could survive. He was not simply gifted. He was different, something beyond what the galaxy had known. Shmi saw the truth before anyone else. She never questioned what he was, only accepted that he was meant for something greater. There was no doubt in her mind that he would leave one day. No power in the galaxy would keep him here forever. He belonged to something far bigger, something she could not protect him from. Slavery shaped him in ways that could not be undone. The Jedi would one day tell him that fear led to suffering, that attachment was dangerous, that the path to peace was letting go. But the Jedi had never been powerless. They had never watched those they loved suffer with no way to stop it. Anakin had. He understood what it meant to be weak, to be at the mercy of forces greater than himself. And from that, a belief took root. Strength was the only thing that mattered. If he was strong enough, no one could take away what he loved. If he had power, he would never be a slave again. This idea would shape him, guide him, and ultimately destroy him. When Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn arrived on Tatooine, fate intervened. Qui-Gon saw what others had only suspected. The Force did not just flow through Anakin, it burned within him, greater than any Jedi before him. Not even Yoda, the wisest of the Order, possessed his raw potential. Anakin was beyond them, beyond anything they had encountered. Qui-Gon believed he had found the Chosen One, the being meant to bring balance to the Force. But balance is not gentle. It does not come without destruction. It does not come without loss. The Jedi did not ask themselves what balance truly meant. To restore something, it must first be broken. Was the Chosen One meant to destroy the Sith? Or had the prophecy never specified which side would fall? Qui-Gon had faith in his vision, but faith does not stop destiny. He freed Anakin, setting him on a path that would change the galaxy. The boy left Tatooine behind, but the desert never left him. The lessons it taught, the scars it left, the fears it carved into him would shape everything he became. The child born of no father, the Jedi's great hope, the Sith's greatest weapon. His name would be spoken across the stars, and history would bend to his choices. The prophecy would come true, but not as the Jedi had hoped, not as the Sith had planned. The Force had chosen Anakin Skywalker, but it had never promised him peace. The Jedi had no place for someone like Anakin Skywalker. He was powerful beyond measure, a child born with a strength that surpassed even the greatest Jedi Masters. Yet he did not fit into their world. He had lived outside their traditions, shaped by suffering they had never known. The Force had created him, but the Jedi did not understand him. Slaves were meant to obey. Jedi were meant to submit to the will of the Force. In theory, the Jedi did not serve anyone, yet their existence was bound by laws, traditions, and codes older than the Republic itself. A Jedi was expected to surrender, to let go of their attachments, to suppress their desires. Anakin had been raised in chains. He knew what it meant to be powerless. The Jedi were offering him something else entirely, a different kind of servitude, one masked in robes and rituals. They spoke of duty, of discipline, of sacrifice. To them, this was freedom. To him, it was another cage. Qui-Gon Jinn did not share the Council's hesitation. He was unlike the others, a Jedi who walked the edge of their teachings, more willing than most to listen to the Force instead of the rules written to control it. He saw Anakin's power and did not fear it. He believed in the prophecy, in the idea that the Force itself had willed Anakin into existence. He looked into the eyes of a child raised in the Outer Rim, who had spent his life as a possession rather than a person, and saw something greater. But faith is not enough to change the course of history. When Qui-Gon brought Anakin before the Jedi Council, he expected resistance, but not outright rejection. They tested the boy, watched as he performed their simple trials with an ease that should have been impossible. They saw the potential, the strength, the power, but they also saw something else. Fear. Master Yoda was the first to speak what the others were thinking. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. The words were old, repeated by Jedi for generations, a warning, a truth, a prophecy unto themselves. He saw the attachment in Anakin, the desperation in his heart, the pain buried beneath his excitement. A Jedi should not fear loss, but Anakin had never known a life without it. They had taken him from his mother, from the only home he had ever known, and expected him to simply let go. The Jedi did not understand. They could not understand. The decision was made. The Council would not train him. He was too dangerous, too old, too much a risk. A boy of 9 years deemed unfit not because of his power, but because of the emotions buried within him. The Jedi had always feared attachment, but they had never feared it as much as they did in him. Qui-Gon refused to accept this. He had never been one to follow orders blindly, had never been one to place the Council's word above his own beliefs. He would train Anakin himself if he had to, but fate does not wait for permission. Before Qui-Gon could defy their ruling, the galaxy changed. The Sith revealed themselves for the first time in 1,000 years. The death of Qui-Gon Jinn on Naboo sealed Anakin's fate. He had been the boy's greatest protector, the one voice in the Order willing to fight for him without hesitation. With his death, there was no one left to challenge the Council's judgment. Obi-Wan Kenobi, still mourning his master, took Anakin as his apprentice, not out of belief in the prophecy, but out of duty to Qui-Gon's final wish. The Jedi had never fully accepted Anakin. They allowed him to train, but their fear never left. They had seen the darkness in him, and now, with his only true advocate gone, they sought to control it rather than nurture him. But fear cannot be hidden, and chains, no matter how well forged, always break. The Jedi wanted Anakin to forget his past, to strip away the parts of himself that did not fit within their mold. But Anakin did not forget. He did not forget the burning suns of Tatooine, or the weight of a slave's collar. He did not forget what it meant to have no power, to be at the mercy of those stronger than him. And he did not forget his mother. The Jedi had freed him, but they had never understood him. He was raised to follow rules written by those who had never suffered as he had. They demanded obedience, but Anakin had spent his childhood yearning for freedom. He wanted more than they would give, needed more than they would allow. The Order told him to let go, to release himself from attachments, to see them as a path to suffering. But Anakin had already known suffering. He had known the feeling of helplessness, of watching those he loved slip away. He would not let it happen again. The Republic had always called the Jedi peacekeepers, but war had no need for peacekeepers. It needed soldiers, tacticians, leaders who would not hesitate when the moment demanded action. Anakin Skywalker, once a boy bound by the chains of slavery, now stood at the forefront of the largest war the galaxy had ever seen, and he thrived in it. The Clone Wars changed everything. The Jedi, who had spent centuries meditating in ivory towers, were thrown into a conflict they were never meant to fight. The Separatists, commanded by Count Dooku and his ruthless war machine, tore across the galaxy, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The Republic, desperate to survive, unleashed its own army, a force of identical men bred for war, trained to obey without question. The Jedi became their generals, forced to abandon their philosophy of restraint in favor of brutal efficiency. For Anakin, it was the perfect battlefield. He was a warrior in ways most Jedi were not. He had the instincts, the aggression, the ability to act without hesitation. While others debated strategy, he moved. While the council preached patience, he struck. His tactics were bold, often reckless, but they worked. He did not fight like a Jedi, he fought to win, and the men who followed him believed in him. The 501st Legion became his. Unlike other Jedi commanders who kept their distance, who viewed the clones as tools rather than individuals, Anakin treated them as brothers. He learned their names, fought alongside them, bled with them. They were not just soldiers. They were his. And in him, they saw a leader who would never leave them behind, who would never throw away their lives for the sake of diplomacy. The war gave him purpose. It validated his power, proved to him that strength was the only thing that mattered. With every victory, his legend grew. He became the Republic's hero, the warrior who could not be stopped, the man who turned the tide of battles through sheer will. He did what had to be done, unburdened by the hesitation of the Jedi Code. And in the fire of war, the cracks in his faith began to spread. He had always questioned the Jedi's way of thinking, but now the flaws were undeniable. They spoke of peace while commanding legions to their deaths. They refused to acknowledge the suffering the war had brought, blind to the toll it was taking on their own people. They held themselves to a code that no longer fit the world they were fighting in. And every time Anakin was forced to ignore that code, every time he acted on instinct rather than doctrine, he succeeded. Losses piled around him, each one cutting deeper than the last. He watched friends fall, men he had fought beside reduced to nothing but numbers in a war that had no end. He buried his emotions, forced himself to keep moving forward, but the weight of it never left him. He told himself he was fighting for something greater, that the pain meant something, but doubt had already begun to take root. Then there was the Chancellor. Palpatine had always been a presence in Anakin's life, a voice of reason when the Jedi refused to listen, a mentor who saw him not as a student, but as an equal. In the chaos of war, that bond only grew stronger. The Chancellor was not like the Jedi Council. He did not scold Anakin for his emotions, did not demand that he suppress what made him strong. He encouraged him, told him what the Jedi never would, that his power was his greatest gift, that he was meant for something greater than the limitations of the Order. The war was breaking the galaxy, but it was also shaping him into something else. He could feel it every time he stepped onto the battlefield, every time he led the charge with the 501st at his back. The Jedi preached restraint, but restraint had no place in war. He was done holding back. With each battle, the distance between Anakin Skywalker and the Jedi Order grew wider. The cracks in his loyalty deepened, not all at once, but piece by piece. Every compromise, every act of defiance, every moment where he chose instinct over tradition. And all the while, Palpatine watched. The Chancellor knew what the Jedi refused to see. He understood the power Anakin possessed, the potential buried beneath years of restraint and doubt. He did not push, not yet. He did not need to. War was doing the work for him. The war forged Anakin Skywalker, but it also destroyed him. Anakin Skywalker was many things: Jedi Knight, war hero, the chosen one. But above all, he was a man in love. His devotion to Padme Amidala, the woman he had adored since childhood, was absolute. It was the one thing that made him feel whole, the one part of his life untouched by war, by duty, by the crushing weight of expectation. But love, as powerful as it was, had its own chains, and his love for her was the one thing he could never afford to lose. From the moment they exchanged vows in secret on Naboo, Anakin lived a life of contradiction. The Jedi Code demanded detachment, yet his heart belonged to her. The Order preached control, yet she made him feel more than he ever had before. He spent years fighting a war that spanned the stars, yet his greatest battles were fought in the quiet moments between missions, balancing the love he could not reveal with the duty he could not escape. Every time he returned to Coruscant, he found her waiting, arms open, eyes filled with the warmth he craved. But those stolen moments were never enough. He lived for her, yet lived in constant fear of losing her. He had lost his mother to the cruelty of the galaxy, and the pain of it never left him. It had shattered him once, and he knew that if Padme was taken from him, there would be nothing left to hold him together. The Jedi Order suspected his attachment but never understood its depth. Obi-Wan saw the way Anakin lingered too long when speaking with her, the way his gaze softened in her presence. He saw the cracks forming. The Council, already wary of Anakin's unorthodox methods, had begun to question his discipline. But Anakin was careful. He had learned to wear the mask of a Jedi to suppress the fire that burned beneath the surface. He would not let them take her away. But the Sith were watching. Darth Sidious, hidden in plain sight as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, had cultivated Anakin's trust over the years. He had positioned himself as a mentor, a confidant, the only figure in the Republic who truly understood him. He had studied Anakin's emotions, his impulses, his strengths, and most importantly, his weaknesses. And none was greater than his love for Padme. The dreams began as whispers in the dark, creeping into Anakin's mind like a warning he could not ignore. He saw Padme in agony, struggling for breath, dying in childbirth. The visions tormented him, just as they had when he had seen his mother suffering on Tatooine. He had ignored them then, and it had cost him everything. He would not make that mistake again. The Jedi offered no answers, no reassurance. To them, fear was the enemy, something to be cast aside. But to Anakin, fear was reality. He had seen what loss could do. He had felt its cold grip tighten around his soul. He knew what it meant to be powerless, and he refused to let it happen again. Palpatine was waiting when Anakin's desperation reached its peak. The Chancellor's words were carefully chosen, his tone soft, understanding. There were powers the Jedi refused to acknowledge, powers that could stop death itself. There had been a Sith Lord who had once wielded such abilities, a master of life and death. It was not an outright promise, but it did not need to be. It was hope, and hope was enough. Anakin clung to that sliver of possibility, even as he felt the distance between himself and the Jedi grow wider. The Order had placed him on the Council but denied him the rank of Master, a blatant insult, a reminder that they still did not trust him. They expected loyalty while keeping him at arm's length. They wanted obedience, not understanding. He turned to Padme for comfort, but even she saw the change in him. He was restless, consumed by thoughts of the future, of what he might lose. His love for her had once been his light, his reason to keep fighting. Now, it was the fire that threatened to consume him. The Jedi feared his attachment, and the Sith saw its potential. The war had changed many things, but nothing had reshaped Anakin more than the battle he fought within himself. The battle between the man who loved Padme and the man who would do anything to keep her. Palpatine had always been there, watching, waiting, knowing. From the moment Anakin Skywalker set foot in the Jedi Temple, the Supreme Chancellor had taken a special interest in him. The boy with impossible power, the prodigy who defied limits, the one whose destiny was written in ancient prophecies. Anakin believed he was walking his own path, making his own choices. But every step had been guided, every doubt carefully planted, every wound subtly deepened. The Jedi Order was a fortress of rules and restraint, a place where power was feared rather than embraced. Anakin's greatness was acknowledged, yet never truly accepted. He had fought on the front lines of the Clone Wars, won victories that turned the tide of battle and saved countless lives. Yet the Council still treated him as an outsider. The honor of sitting among them had been granted, but the rank of Master had been withheld. A gesture meant to humble him, but one that only fueled his resentment. It was a slow unraveling, one that Palpatine nurtured with care. Every casual conversation, every moment of camaraderie was calculated. The Jedi are wary of you, Anakin. They do not trust your power. They fear what you might become. Words spoken like passing thoughts, yet they sank deep into Anakin's mind. And then, the whispers grew louder. Anakin's dreams had turned into nightmares, visions of Padme gasping for breath, her life slipping away, a future he could not control. It was happening again, just like his mother. He had promised her he would save her, but that promise had died with her in the Tusken Raider camp. Now the same horror was unfolding before him, and the Jedi had no answers. Dreams pass in time, Obi-Wan had said. Empty words, words spoken by someone who had never known true loss. But Palpatine, he understood. He invited Anakin to his office, a place of opulence and power, far removed from the cold halls of the Jedi Temple. The conversation began as it always did, gentle, reassuring. A discussion about the war, about the Republic, about the Jedi. But then his voice lowered, his tone shifting from casual to something darker, something far more deliberate. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? A story. That was all it was. A legend of a Sith Lord so powerful he could stop death itself. He could save the ones he loved from dying. The Jedi would never teach such power. They could not. They would not. But the Sith had unlocked secrets the Jedi refused to acknowledge. Palpatine let the words hang in the air, waiting for Anakin to respond. He knew the boy's mind, knew that fear had already taken root. And now he offered the one thing the Jedi never could: control. Anakin listened, every word cutting deeper than the last. He had spent his life believing the Sith were nothing but monsters, driven by anger and destruction. But Palpatine spoke of power, of wisdom, of knowledge that had been hidden from him. And for the first time, Anakin questioned what he had been taught. The Jedi said the dark side was dangerous, but what if they were wrong? He left the Chancellor's office with the story ringing in his ears, its implications clawing at his thoughts. Darth Plagueis had been killed by his own apprentice, betrayed. But what did that matter? If his power had been real, if the ability to stop death truly existed, then nothing else mattered. That night, Anakin stood in the shadows of the Jedi Temple, staring across the cityscape of Coruscant. Padme was asleep in their apartment, unaware of the storm raging within him. He wanted to tell her, wanted to confess everything, but how could he? She would not understand. The Council had already turned against him. He could feel it. Their whispers, their suspicion, their judgment. They would never teach him what he needed to know. But Palpatine, he was offering a path forward, a way to ensure that Padme would not suffer the fate of his mother. It was in that moment that the last wall began to crack. Anakin had spent years resisting the pull of his emotions, suppressing his fears, pretending that he was at peace. But he was not. He never had been. He was tired of pretending, tired of waiting, tired of being afraid. For the first time, he truly began to listen. The nightmares returned, more vivid, more merciless. Padme gasping for air, reaching for him, her strength fading, the warmth of life leaving her body as she collapsed. His hands held nothing but ghosts, his power meaningless against the march of fate. Every night the dream repeated, and every night he woke with his heart pounding, drenched in sweat, staring into the darkness. It was the same horror that had haunted him on Tatooine. His mother had suffered while he was worlds away, and when he finally arrived, it had been too late. He had held her for seconds before she was gone. And now, he was seeing it again. Not in the past, but in the future. The Jedi had always spoken of destiny, but what if this was not some fixed point in time? What if it was a warning? He had seen visions before. They were never random. He had foreseen victories, sensed danger before it struck. Every instinct told him that what he was seeing was real. And yet, the Jedi gave him nothing. He had gone to Master Yoda, seeking wisdom, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that someone within the Order would understand his fear. The ancient Grand Master had closed his eyes, exhaled deeply, and offered the only guidance the Jedi ever gave. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. Let go, move on, accept. But Anakin was not like the Jedi before him. He did not accept. He did not let go. He held on with everything he had, because he knew what it meant to lose. He knew the agony of helplessness. He had sworn to himself that he would never feel that way again. And so, when the Jedi Order gave him silence, the Chancellor gave him promises. Palpatine had always known the right words, the right tone, the exact way to speak to him. There was no pretense of detachment, no lectures about the will of the Force. He spoke of control, of power, of choices. The Jedi are afraid of you, Anakin. They see your power, but instead of nurturing it, they hold it back. A pause, a knowing look. But there are ways beyond their teachings, ways that could save her. That was the moment Anakin truly began to listen. Before, the words had been suggestions, planted carefully to grow over time. Now, they were an open path. Palpatine no longer whispered from the shadows. He stood in the light, revealing what he had kept hidden. He spoke of the dark side not as a corruption, but as an untapped well of potential. The Jedi were blinded by their own rules, too afraid to use the full power of the Force. And now, Anakin saw it for what it was. The Jedi weren't helping him because they couldn't. They didn't have the knowledge. They had cut themselves off from it long ago. And so the question was no longer whether he should trust Palpatine. The question was, did he have any other choice? The Jedi Council only made it easier for him. They had never truly accepted him. But now, they were watching him with suspicion, treating him as if he were already guilty of some unseen crime. The Chancellor had appointed him as his personal representative on the Council, and instead of welcoming his insight, they had used it as an opportunity to humiliate him, granting him a seat, but not the rank of Master. It was an insult, a message. They did not trust him, and yet they wanted something from him. Obi-Wan had delivered the request carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a man who knew how fragile everything had become. The Council wanted Anakin to spy on Palpatine, to report on his actions, to betray the one man who had stood by him. He had been a Jedi all his life, but in that moment, the reality of his place among them was clear. He was useful, but not respected, powerful, but not trusted. The Jedi Order was not his family. It was a cage. So when he returned to Palpatine's office, when he sat before him and listened to the final words that would shape his fate, he already knew what was coming. You must embrace a larger view of the Force, Anakin. There was no hesitation now, no need for deception. Palpatine had led him to the edge, and now he only needed to step forward. If one is to understand the great mystery, one must study all its aspects. not just the dogmatic narrow view of the Jedi. And then the last move, spoken not as a command, but as an offering, as a gift. If you wish to become powerful enough, I believe together we can discover the secret to preventing death itself. The promise of salvation wrapped in the shadow of the Sith. Anakin did not respond, not yet. But in his heart, the choice had already been made. The storm had begun. Across the galaxy, the clones turned on their Jedi commanders. Battlefields became execution grounds. The warriors of peace, generals in a war they never wanted, were cut down in the very moment they thought victory was near. Ki-Adi-Mundi fell on Megiddo, gunned down by the troops who had fought beside him for years. Aayla Secura never had time to react, her blue saber unlit as the bolts struck her. Plo Koon, a master pilot, perished not in battle, but in a fiery explosion above Cato Neimoidia. His allies turned executioners. The Jedi were dying, and in the heart of Coruscant, their sanctuary, their history, their future, was about to be erased. Anakin Skywalker was dead. The man who stood in his place was something else, something new, something terrible. The title had been given, Darth Vader. Palpatine had spoken the words, binding the last remnants of Anakin to the darkness that now consumed him. His first test, his first command, was one final betrayal. He did not hesitate. The 501st followed him as they had always done. They were soldiers, trained to obey, programmed for loyalty. To them, he was still their leader, their general. The orders came from the Supreme Chancellor himself. There was no questioning, no doubt. Their march through the Jedi Temple was steady, methodical. No wasted movements, no second thoughts. The night air crackled with the glow of sabers meeting blaster fire. Jedi of all ranks fought to defend what had always been sacred ground. Some had trained for war, others had only ever studied the ways of the Force in quiet meditation. It made no difference. The clones were relentless, their precision perfect, their numbers overwhelming. The archives burned first, data-hungry flames consuming knowledge that had endured for generations. Holocrons shattered under blaster fire, their secrets lost forever. Statues of Jedi Masters stood tall, unyielding in the chaos, until they too were destroyed, icons of a past that was being rewritten in blood and ash. And leading it all, at the very heart of the massacre, was Vader. The blue glow of his old saber was gone, replaced by the crimson blade he would wield for the rest of his life. A weapon that cast shadows as it slashed through robes and flesh alike. A group of knights tried to stand against him, their coordination flawless, their resolve unbreakable. But he was beyond them now, faster, stronger, fueled by rage that had no limits. The Jedi had spent years training him, teaching him their forms, their weaknesses. Now they felt the consequences of what they had created. His blade cut through them one by one, and with every body that fell, Anakin Skywalker drifted further into oblivion. But the true test came in the quietest room, the council chamber. The youngest among them stood huddled together, their small hands clutching training sabers that offered no real defense. Some stepped forward, their eyes wide, desperate for an answer. Master Skywalker, what are we going to do? For a single breath, there was silence. Then the blade ignited. There had been lines he never thought he would cross, but those lines had already been shattered. Mace Windu had fallen. The Jedi were traitors. Padme was in danger. If he was to save her, if he was to have the power to shape fate itself, then nothing could stand in his way. Not even them. The temple burned as dawn approached. Smoke twisted through the air. carrying with it the last remnants of a lost era. By the time the sun rose, the Jedi Order was gone, and in its place, something far darker had taken root. The sky burned in hues of crimson and gold, fire churning beneath the jagged cliffs of Mustafar. The air was thick with the scent of molten rock and scorched metal, the very planet itself a cauldron of unrelenting heat. But the inferno was nothing compared to the fire that raged between two warriors standing upon a narrow bridge above the chaos. Anakin Skywalker was gone. The man who had once fought for justice, who had sworn to protect the weak, now stood draped in blackened robes, his golden eyes burning with a hatred that seemed bottomless. Across from him stood Obi-Wan Kenobi, a man burdened with the weight of failure, grief thick in his voice as he spoke the words that cut deeper than any blade. Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil. From my point of view, the Jedi are evil. Every bond they had forged, every lesson, every victory and loss they had shared, none of it mattered now. Anakin had made his choice. The friend Obi-Wan once knew had been buried beneath arrogance, resentment, and power. The Jedi, his brother, had been replaced by something monstrous. Their sabers ignited. Blue clashed against blue, sending a blinding shower of sparks into the air. The ground beneath them trembled as their blades struck with a fury born of betrayal and sorrow. Obi-Wan fought with precision, his form steady, tempered by discipline. Anakin fought with overwhelming force, each attack meant to crush, to destroy, to end. Through the burning halls of the Separatist stronghold, they clashed. Pillars crumbled, consoles were cleaved in half, molten steel dripped from shattered beams. Anakin's strikes came faster, his anger fueling his strength. But Obi-Wan had seen this before, this raw, untempered rage. He had fought it in training rooms, in battles across the galaxy, and now he fought it for the last time. The battle spilled out onto the catwalks above the river of fire, the roar of Mustafar's wrath matching the storm between them. The world around them was dying, the structures breaking apart, the flames reaching skyward. They leapt from platform to platform, neither yielding, neither relenting. Obi-Wan could see it, the loss of control, the widening cracks in the man before him. Anakin's breathing was heavy, his movements growing more erratic, more reckless. "You've allowed this Dark Lord to twist your mind," Obi-Wan pleaded, voice straining against the weight of the moment. Until now, you've become the very thing you swore to destroy." Anakin's response was a roar of fury, a strike meant to end the fight in a single blow. But Obi-Wan parried, sending him stumbling backward. The fight carried them onto a lone floating platform, the searing heat rising from below. The lava churned, hungry, waiting. Anakin stood on the edge, blade trembling with fury, hatred twisting his features. Obi-Wan leapt onto higher ground, his voice laced with finality. "It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground." For a heartbeat, the galaxy held its breath. Anakin snarled, arrogance outweighing sense. He surged forward, launching himself into the air. The move was reckless, predictable, a mistake. Obi-Wan's saber struck in a flash of blue light. Anakin landed hard, his body skidding across the molten rock. His saber tumbled into the river of lava below, lost to the flames. His legs, his arm, gone, sliced away in a single, devastating instant. The warrior who had once stood at the height of his power had been reduced to a broken figure clawing at the burning ground. Obi-Wan did not move. His breath was shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had done what he had to. And yet, the sight before him was unbearable. His brother, the boy he had raised, the man he had fought beside for years, lay in ruin, his face contorted with agony. "You were the chosen one." Obi-Wan's voice cracked with emotion. It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them. Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness. Anakin's eyes lifted, burning with pure hatred. I hate you. Obi-Wan's expression twisted with sorrow. He had fought to save him, to reach the man buried beneath the darkness, but there was nothing left. You were my brother Anakin, he whispered. I loved you. He turned away. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. He left him there, broken, burning, screaming his rage to the uncaring sky. The flames reached for him, consuming what was left of Anakin Skywalker. Consciousness returned in waves of unbearable agony. The sensation of fire crawling beneath his skin, of raw nerves screaming beneath a suffocating weight, filled every inch of what remained of him. Pain was his first companion. The second was the cold sterility of the machine that held him. Anakin Skywalker had burned on the banks of Mustafar, but something else had risen in his place, something stitched together by the will of a Sith Lord and the cold precision of cybernetics. The once mighty Jedi had been reduced to charred remnants of flesh and shattered limbs, pieced back together within the sterile walls of an imperial medical chamber. The Jedi robes were gone. The man who had once stood at the center of the galaxy's greatest war was now encased in something alien, something grotesque. The table beneath him tilted, raising him to his feet for the first time since his mutilation. The weight was immediate, oppressive, unyielding. Black Durasteel wrapped around his body like a cage. Every breath was drawn through a filter of machinery, the steady rhythm of mechanized inhalation pressing against his ears. The mask locked into place, sealing him inside. He tried to move. The limbs that had once obeyed him without thought, the hands that had once gripped a lightsaber with perfect precision, replaced. He reached out, flexing the metal fingers that now belonged to him, but they were not his own. They were cold, unfeeling. The room was a shadowed tomb. Only one presence stood before him, cloaked in darkness, his voice low and deliberate. Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine, the master who had guided him into oblivion. How do you feel, my apprentice? The words twisted like a dagger. Apprentice, the title of a servant, not a warrior, not a chosen one. Anakin had given everything, his loyalty, his soul, his body, and yet this was what he had been reduced to. His voice, what remained of it, rumbled forth, distorted, mechanical. Where is Padme? The words barely escaped past the weight pressing down on him. His mind clung to her image, his reason, his anchor. He had done this for her. He had betrayed his order, slaughtered the Jedi, burned entire worlds, all to save her. Palpatine's expression remained unreadable, but the answer came like a hammer to the chest. It seems, in your anger, you killed her. The room contracted. The machinery around him became distant, his thoughts unraveling into a spiral of disbelief. No, that wasn't possible. He had seen her. She had been alive, whispering his name, reaching for him as the flames had licked at his skin. She had still believed in him. He had heard it in her voice. The Force swelled around him, twisting in his grief. The weight of the words settled into his chest, a wound deeper than the burns, more devastating than the severed limbs. It was not the Jedi who had taken her from him. It was not Obi-Wan, nor the Republic, nor the war. It was him. Rage erupted from his core, raw and uncontrollable. The machines in the chamber trembled, crushed beneath the power of his grief. The glass shattered, shards scattering in the darkness. The metal walls groaned as his fury rippled outward, a wave of destruction that neither the Sith nor the Force itself could contain. The scream that followed was something unnatural. a sound torn from a place beyond pain, beyond reason. It was the death wail of a soul unmade. The galaxy had lost Anakin Skywalker on Mustafar, but in that moment, within the darkness of the chamber, something worse had taken his place. Darkness stretched across the stars, expanding like a wound torn open in the Force. The Jedi were scattered, hunted, fading into whispers and shadows. Where once they had stood as guardians of the galaxy, now they were fugitives, fleeing from something they had never known how to fight, one of their own. Darth Vader stepped onto the battlefield for the first time in his new form, and the galaxy recoiled. The mechanical limbs, the suffocating armor, the rhythmic breath that filled the silence before the slaughter. He was not the Anakin Skywalker they had once known. He was something else now, something cold and relentless. Where the Jedi had once fought beside him as brothers, now they ran from him as prey. Palpatine's orders were clear. Hunt them down. No mercy. No hesitation. Those who had survived Order 66 had slipped through the cracks of the Empire's first purge, but they would not escape forever. Vader would ensure that. His first test came swiftly. The Council had fallen. The Temple was in ruins, but the Order had not been entirely eradicated. Survivors had scattered across the Outer Rim, hiding in old strongholds, forgotten ruins, and the underbellies of lawless worlds. But the Sith knew how the Jedi thought. He knew where they would run. The hunt began on Murkana, a wasteland of industry and corruption. Its smog-covered cities had harbored fugitives for centuries. Jedi had hidden there before. They were hiding there again. Vader's arrival was not quiet. It never would be. The transport landed, and as the ramp lowered, the silence that followed was suffocating. The workers, the citizens, the criminals that slithered through the streets, all of them froze. His presence was overwhelming, a weight that pressed into the very air around him. The black armor, the gleaming death mask, the measured breathing. It was not the image of a man. It was something far worse. The first survivors were not warriors. They were Jedi who had abandoned their sabers in favor of survival. They had fled the war, chosen exile over defiance. They had believed that would be enough, but nothing was enough anymore. Vader did not hesitate. The red blade ignited, and the world shifted. They had been teachers, healers, diplomats. None of that mattered now. Now, they were traitors. He moved through them with methodical precision, heavy steps breaking the silence between every strike. The first fell without so much as a scream. The second tried to run, the Force carrying his feet faster than any normal man. But Vader's reach was longer. The saber found its mark, slicing through robes and flesh. The third, an older Jedi who had once served on the battlefield, attempted to fight. His blue blade met red, the two humming in violent harmony. But he was slow, aging. Vader was something else entirely. The duel did not last long. He felt their fear through the Force. The ones who had not yet been cut down, the ones hiding in the alleys, pressing against walls, gripping their chests as they struggled to breathe against the weight of his presence. It followed him like a storm, rolling through the city, suffocating the air itself. The Jedi had spoken of the dark side as something corrupting, something weakening. They had been wrong. It was power. More names were added to the list of the dead. More blades were lost to the dust. The mission continued. World after world he pursued them, Jabim, Kashyyyk, Chandrila. The whispers of survivors grew quieter with each passing day. The Jedi were fading, slipping into myth before the galaxy's eyes. But that was not enough. Sidious had not built this new empire to share it with the ghosts of an old one. Vader's body had changed. He was slower, heavier, But that no longer mattered. He was stronger. The armor was a burden, but it was also a weapon. He had been forced to relearn everything: his movements, his balance, his connection to the Force. The Jedi had once praised his speed, his precision, his raw talent. Now, there was no need for elegance, only inevitability. The Empire did not announce his name in official records. It did not need to. His presence alone became legend. His breath, the sound of it in the dark, became a death knell. Planets fell silent before his arrival, and entire sectors held their breath at the rumors of his next destination. The purge was not over. It would never truly be over. The Sith did not allow loose ends, but the Jedi were no longer warriors. They were no longer defenders of the peace. They were afraid, and that was all that mattered. The Jedi were dying, but not fast enough. Some still hid, clinging to the remnants of a ruined order, scattering across the outer rim, vanishing into the underworld, or whispering their defiance in the shadows of a galaxy now ruled by the Sith. The Great Purge had shattered them, but extinction required more than destruction. It required fear, an enemy that did not rest, and a blade that hunted relentlessly. Darth Vader understood this. The war had not ended. It had only changed shape. But he could not hunt them all, not alone. The Inquisitorius was born in darkness, built from the broken, twisted remains of Jedi who had once stood against the Empire. The weak had been cut down. The strong had been given a choice: serve or suffer a death far worse than the one they had escaped. Those who bent the knee became something else. They were no longer Jedi, but they were not Sith either. They were weapons, sharpened in agony and wielded without mercy. Their training began with pain. Sidious did not tolerate hesitation, and neither did Vader. The Emperor had made it clear these were not Sith apprentices. They were tools, meant to serve, meant to be used and discarded as necessary. But they would be formidable because they had to be. They would be ruthless because the Jedi who remained were desperate. And above all, they would know fear. The fortress on Nur became their crucible. A black citadel carved into the sea, isolated from the rest of the galaxy. It was a place where hope drowned. The halls were cold, lined with the remains of those who had failed. Inside its walls, the training of the Inquisitors was simple: survive. If they hesitated, if they faltered, if they showed even a flicker of their old Jedi weakness, they died. Vader tested them himself. He wanted them to understand what it meant to fight against the power they had once resisted. He wanted them to feel the weight of their failure, to understand that the Jedi they hunted were nothing compared to the Force that commanded them. He broke them one by one. Some resisted at first, clinging to the ideals they had sworn to uphold. They spoke of balance, of redemption, of the old ways. That weakness was cut out of them, either by the blade or by the Force itself. The ones who learned quickly survived. The ones who did not were discarded. Fear became their foundation. It was their leash, their weapon, and their lesson. There was no camaraderie among the Inquisitors, only competition. The strong devoured the weak, and Vader made certain they understood what failure meant. Those who disappointed him did not get second chances. He did not kill them in battle. He executed them in front of the others, slowly, deliberately. He wanted them to feel it. He wanted them to know that the only thing worse than failing him in combat was failing him in service. He gave them new weapons, sabers that could intimidate as much as kill, twin-bladed, spinning, designed to disorient and overwhelm. They were not meant to be elegant. They were not meant to be Jedi weapons. They were weapons of terror. The first hunts were brutal. The Inquisitors did not fight like Jedi. They hunted in numbers, swarming their targets, exhausting them, breaking them down piece by piece. They did not offer duels, nor did they fight with honor. Vader had made it clear. This was not a war of warriors. It was extermination. The Jedi who remained did not expect it. They had thought they could hide, that the Sith would grow complacent, that the loss of the Order would mean the end of the war. But they had underestimated the power of vengeance. The Inquisitors did not simply kill them. They shattered them, pulling information from their minds, twisting their own weaknesses against them, using their own memories as weapons. Vader oversaw it all, a shadow that loomed over every mission. The Inquisitors feared him more than they feared the Jedi. He ensured that. He reminded them often. But even among them, there were whispers. They spoke of the rage that simmered beneath his mask, of the way he trained them, not as soldiers, but as tools to be discarded, of the way he fought, how he no longer moved with the speed of a Jedi, but with something more terrible. He was not fast, but he was inevitable. He was not reckless, but he was merciless. Some wondered if he saw himself in them. None dared ask. The war had changed. The Jedi had once been the hunters. Now they were the hunted. And the ones who pursued them were not Sith, nor Jedi, nor anything in between. They were something else. They were Inquisitors. The lava still burned. The air still choked with smoke and sulfur. Mustafar had not changed. The firestorm raged as it always had, a world caught in endless torment. But for Vader, it was more than a battlefield. It was the place of his greatest failure, his greatest suffering. And so, it would become his sanctuary. He did not choose Mustafar. It chose him. The dark side pulsed beneath its surface, raw and violent, feeding on pain, on anger, on loss. His master saw its potential, its power, and ordered that Vader claim it. A fortress would rise from the ruin of his past, a monument to the Sith, a place where the Force would bend and twist to his will. Construction began beneath the eye of the Empire, but this was no mere stronghold. The architects followed designs older than the Republic, patterns drawn from the ancient knowledge of the Sith. The structure was not simply built, it was carved from the veins of the dark side itself, shaped to focus and amplify the power that lay beneath. The fortress was a wound in the Force, a scar that bled suffering and fury. The locals feared it. The lava dwellers who had once worshipped the Sith sorcerer Momin whispered of what was being created. They had seen men enter the Black Citadel and never return. They had felt the air grow heavier, the ground tremble with something unnatural. They knew what Mustafar was, and they knew it was waking. Vader cared little for them. His mind was elsewhere. His work with the Empire was ceaseless, but it was here, in the fortress, that his true obsession festered. The Emperor had promised him power beyond understanding, power to break the chains of mortality itself. Palpatine had dangled the secret of life and death before him, and Vader had grasped at it like a drowning man reaching for the surface. It had begun with whispers, ancient knowledge locked away in the ruins of the Sith, legends of masters who had bent the Force to their will, who had defied the natural order, who had stolen souls from the void. The Emperor had spoken of these things, but never revealed them fully, always keeping Vader searching, always keeping him bound. But Vader had grown restless. He no longer sought simple power. He sought her. The dreams still came, the echoes of a past that would not die. He had killed her. He had felt her life slip away, heard her final breath in the emptiness of his mind. And yet, she remained. The visions tormented him, her voice calling to him, her face blurred by time but never forgotten. He had burned away the name Anakin Skywalker, but he could not burn away the love that had once defined him. He refused to accept that she was lost. And so the fortress was more than a throne. It was a key. The structure was designed to channel the power of Mustafar, to open something long sealed. The lava, the suffering, the death. It would be harnessed, twisted, forced to serve his will. The dark side did not create, it consumed, it destroyed. But Vader sought to do the impossible, to break through the veil, to reach beyond death itself. He spent hours in meditation, forcing the Force to bend to his command, pushing deeper into its abyss. The energy of Mustafar surged around him, but something resisted. A barrier he could not yet break. The Emperor had promised knowledge, but Vader was beginning to suspect that the greatest truths were not meant to be given. They had to be taken. And so, he searched. Artifacts were brought to him, relics from forgotten Sith tombs, scrolls of power lost in the devastation of the Jedi purge. He studied them all, deciphering their secrets, discarding the weak, testing the strong. The Inquisitors whispered of his obsession, but they knew better than to question. The Emperor remained silent, watching, waiting, measuring his apprentice's progress. The attempts continued, the rituals growing darker, the sacrifices greater. Some came close, some showed glimpses, but none brought her back. None brought her back. Vader's rage grew. The fortress trembled with it. The walls cracked, the energy within spiraling out of control. It was as if the Force itself resisted him, as if it mocked his pain, as if it refused to grant him what he sought. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Some nights he stood at the edge of the fortress, watching the lava churn beneath him. The memory of fire, of agony, of betrayal never faded. It was here that Skywalker had died. It was here that Vader had been born. And yet, when the silence stretched long enough, when the storm of the dark side quieted, he still heard her voice. Faint, distant, calling. The sound of his breathing announced death before his blade ever ignited. To be in his presence was to feel the weight of inevitability, a force of destruction that moved with singular purpose. There was no negotiation, no mercy. The galaxy had learned to fear the will of the Emperor, and that will was carried out by the hand of Darth Vader. The Jedi were gone, the Republic was dust, and yet rebellion festered. It had been inevitable. Palpatine's rule was built on fear, and fear bred resistance. From the core worlds to the distant outer rim, whispers of defiance stirred. Some foolishly sought to oppose the Empire through politics, some through the shadows of insurgency, but there were still those who clung to the past. The Jedi who had survived Order 66 were no longer warriors. They were ghosts. Hunted, scattered, broken, they had buried their lightsabers and faded into the obscurity of the galaxy's forgotten corners. But some could not let go of their faith, their duty. And so, they fought. Vader ensured they regretted it. His arrival signified the end of all hope. Planets that had dared to shelter fugitives burned for their defiance. Settlements that had whispered treason were reduced to rubble. He did not just punish rebellion, he erased it. His strikes were precise, unrelenting. When he landed on a world, it did not simply surrender. It was subjugated, its spirit crushed beneath the weight of imperial law. Mon Cala was no different. The oceanic world had been a beacon of resistance, its leaders unwilling to bow to imperial rule. Their fleet posed a growing threat, their people defiant despite the Emperor's warnings. When diplomacy failed, the task fell to Vader. He arrived with an armada, his Star Destroyer casting a shadow over the waves, his orders absolute. Mon Cala would either kneel or be drowned in its own waters. The battle was swift and brutal. The Imperial forces swept across the floating cities, crushing all who resisted. Vader led the assault personally, his black figure standing against the backdrop of fire and sinking metal. He moved with precision, carving through enemy forces with practiced efficiency. The Mon Calamari and their Quarren allies fought desperately, but they were never the true targets. The Jedi were here. He could feel them. The Force carried their presence like an echo through the currents, faint yet unmistakable. They had hidden among the people, believing themselves safe in the chaos of war. But there was no sanctuary from Vader. He followed the disturbance like a predator stalking wounded prey, his anger sharpening his senses, his patience non-existent. When he found them, they made their stand. 2 Jedi Masters, seasoned warriors who had survived the Purge, who had felt the betrayal of their own soldiers and still fought on. They had waited for him, blades ignited, resolve unshaken. But resolve was not enough. The duel was short. They had once been formidable, but they were not prepared for what he had become. One fell within minutes, his body cast into the depths below. The other fought longer, desperation forcing him to draw on every ounce of skill he had left. But Vader was relentless. He shattered his opponent's defenses, drove him to the edge of the ruined platform, and ended it with a single stroke. The rebellion on Mon Cala collapsed soon after. The cities burned, their people scattered. The survivors would become refugees, their fleet escaping into the stars to fight another day. But their world was lost. The Emperor was pleased. Another threat extinguished, another world broken beneath the weight of the Sith. Vader's efficiency was unquestionable, his loyalty absolute. Or so it seemed. The cracks were small, but they were there. He never voiced them. He never acted on them. But they existed. In the silence between missions, in the moments where he was left with nothing but his thoughts, the questions festered. Palpatine had given him purpose, had reforged him into something greater than Anakin Skywalker had ever been. But to what end? He was a weapon, a tool. Every mission, every battle, he was sent to enact his master's will, never his own. He had traded one master for another, one set of chains for another. The Jedi had claimed to serve peace, but had sought control. The Sith had promised power, but had given only servitude. He dismissed the thoughts when they surfaced. They were weakness, remnants of a past that no longer existed. The Emperor had saved him, had given him the strength to survive. And yet, there was no one left who called him by his true name. The galaxy whispered in fear of Darth Vader, but none spoke of Anakin Skywalker. That name was dust, buried beneath the ashes of the Jedi Temple. But the past did not die so easily. In the darkness of his fortress, in the solitude of space, he could still hear echoes of the man he had been, and he could not silence them forever. The name should not have meant anything. It was a common one, too insignificant, too ordinary. But it struck him like a blade. Skywalker. He had killed that name long ago. He had buried it beneath fire and blood. Yet it had returned, carried by a boy who should not exist. The Force did not whisper this truth. It shouted it. A presence too familiar, a voice too young yet carrying the weight of something ancient. Vader did not need confirmation. He knew. Luke Skywalker, a child, a rebel pilot, and somehow his. The realization burned through him with a fury he had not felt in years. It was impossible. Padme had died, and with her, the last fragile ties to the life he had abandoned. Or so he had believed. Now, the certainty of his past was unraveling. If this boy lived, then the Emperor had lied. Palpatine had lied. It was an insult beyond words, a deception too great to forgive. He had given everything, his mind, his body, his soul, to the will of his master. He had slaughtered in Palpatine's name, had burned the past to ash at his command. And yet all this time the greatest truth had been hidden from him. Rage threatened to consume him, but beneath it was something colder, something more dangerous. This changed everything. For the first time in years, the path before him was unclear. His orders remained the same: crush the rebellion, ensure the Emperor's dominion was absolute. And yet, Luke Skywalker had become more than a target. He was a fracture in the foundation of Vader's purpose. The boy had been raised among commoners, his existence erased from the annals of history. There had been no trace of him in the Empire's records, no indication that a Skywalker had ever survived. How had he been hidden? Who had dared to keep him away? These questions gnawed at him, but one truth outweighed all others. Luke was his blood. The hunt began. Rebel intelligence networks had been difficult to infiltrate, their secrecy forged through years of hardship and survival. But Vader's reach was vast, his influence unstoppable. He commanded fleets, led assassins, broke prisoners beneath the weight of the dark side. No secret could remain hidden from him for long. He pursued every lead with relentless precision, tracing the boy's movements across the stars. Reports from Yavin 4, whispers from bounty hunters, fragmented transmissions intercepted by the Imperial fleet. Each piece of information drew him closer. Each confirmed sighting stoked the fire of his obsession. Obsession. The word lingered, unwelcome. There was no obsession, only duty. The child was a threat, a weapon the rebellion would wield against the Empire. It was his responsibility to eliminate that threat. And yet, every time he heard the name, he hesitated. Every time he felt the boy's presence ripple through the Force, something unfamiliar stirred within him. He could not define it, could not silence it. He had not felt such conflict since Mustafar. The memory was a wound that never fully healed. The heat of the lava, the clash of sabers, the voice of a man he had once called brother screaming through the smoke. His failure, his arrogance, his blind belief that he was in control. And beyond that, her face. Padme's voice, pleading, her final words before her light faded. There is good in him. I know there is. Still. He had dismissed it then. He had cast aside every doubt, every shred of weakness, because to acknowledge them was to acknowledge the ruin of what he had become. But now, the words would not leave him. Palpatine had kept this from him. Why? Was it fear? Had the Emperor seen something he had not? Had he sensed a threat greater than rebellion, greater than the Jedi? What did Palpatine know that he did not? Vader's grip tightened. Luke was his, and that meant his fate was not for the Emperor to decide. The galaxy did not know it yet, but a war had begun. One far greater than the struggle between Empire and rebellion. It was not about politics, not about power. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about a father and his son. Vader was patient. He had learned long ago that the galaxy could be bent to his will, but only with the right pressure. Strength alone was not enough. Timing, control, manipulation. These were the weapons that shaped destiny. Cloud City was the perfect trap. Isolated, quiet, suspended between the storm-racked sky above and the abyss below. Lando Calrissian had folded under Imperial pressure, and soon the boy would arrive. The Falcon would land, Skywalker would come, and Vader would be waiting. This was not a battle to be won with brute force. Luke was not ready, and that was the point. He needed to see how small he was, how fragile his strength remained. The arrogance of youth, the foolish courage of a Jedi who did not yet understand the game he was playing. These would be his undoing. The son had been trained in desperation, taught in exile, given just enough knowledge to believe he could stand against the shadow that ruled the stars. But knowledge was not wisdom, and raw strength was not power. The boy would break. The duel began in the carbon freezing chamber, the orange glow of the machinery casting long shadows as steam hissed between them. Luke came forward, uncertain but determined, his blue saber igniting with defiance. He was reckless, powerful, but unrefined. Every movement lacked the polish of true mastery. Vader made no effort to overwhelm him immediately. That was not the purpose of this confrontation. He parried with ease, deflecting each strike with calculated precision. This was a lesson. The difference between warrior and master, between boy and Sith Lord. Luke lunged, and Vader countered. Each attack was deflected, each opening seized upon. The darkness of the chamber suited the fight, deep, oppressive, filled with flickering lights and shifting shadows. It mirrored what was happening within Luke himself. Fear. The boy fought to suppress it, but Vader could feel it ripple through the Force. Good. As the fight moved into the industrial corridors of the city, Vader began to press harder. Each strike was heavier. The weight of the duel shifted, his blows hammering down with relentless power. Luke was forced back, barely holding his own. The boy was struggling to breathe, sweat beading on his forehead, his mind racing to keep up. The son had skill, but he did not yet understand the war he was fighting. Then came the final test. The moment when he had exhausted himself, when survival took priority over victory. That was when Vader changed the nature of the battle. He struck with fury. The duel moved to the maintenance platform, where the endless sky stretched around them. Luke was cornered, panting, battered, his stance growing weaker with every second. Vader pressed forward. He was done teaching. The boy staggered, and Vader saw his opening. His saber swept through the air, and in a single brutal motion, Luke's hand was severed. His scream echoed through the city, his saber spinning into the abyss below. Now, there was only pain. The boy clutched his wrist, eyes wide with agony, his breath ragged. He had fought well, for someone so unprepared, but he had never truly had a chance. Vader stepped forward, towering over him, his voice calm, unshaken by the battle. "You are beaten." There was nowhere left to run. The edge of the platform loomed behind Luke, the wind howling in his ears. Vader deactivated his saber and let the silence stretch between them. Then, with measured precision, he delivered the truth. "Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father." There it was, the shift. Luke's pain turned to confusion, his breathing uneven. "He told me enough. He told me you killed him." Vader did not hesitate. "I am your father." The words fell like a death sentence. The boy recoiled as if struck, shaking his head. "No, that's not true. That's impossible." Vader had expected denial, but the Force did not lie. Luke knew. Even as his mind rejected it, the truth had already begun to unravel him. "Search your feelings," Vader commanded. "You know it to be true." Luke's eyes filled with horror. This was not the moment of victory. Not yet. The truth had been revealed, but now the boy had to accept it. "Join me." Vader extended his hand. "Together, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy." It was not a demand. It was an offer. A chance for Luke to escape the weakness of the rebellion, to step beyond the lies of the Jedi. The dark side was power, and together they could shape the galaxy as they saw fit. Luke stared at him, face twisted in anguish. And then he did the only thing left to him. He let go. Vader watched as his son plummeted into the abyss, swallowed by the storm below. No scream, no last plea, just silence as he fell. Vader turned away. The boy had made his choice. But the battle was not over. Not yet. Luke Skywalker had rejected him, but a door had been opened, and in time the son would return to face the father once more. The pieces had been set long ago, and now the final move was at hand. The Emperor had foreseen it. A boy who carried the blood of the Chosen One, raw and untamed. A father who had once been the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, now reduced to a blade wielded in another's hand. The fate of the Sith, the Jedi, and the galaxy itself would be decided within the cold, hollow heart of the second Death Star. Luke Skywalker had come willingly. That was the Emperor's greatest amusement. The boy believed in redemption, in the fragile hope that his father, the dreaded Lord Vader, could be saved. Foolish. Palpatine had whispered into Anakin Skywalker's ear once before. Now he whispered again, though this time it was to the son. The promise of power, the weight of duty, the temptation of control. He had used these weapons against Anakin, and now he wielded them against Luke. Vader stood motionless as the Emperor spoke, his presence looming but silent. He had been summoned to watch, to wait, to ensure his son made the choice his master demanded. "Strike me down," Palpatine purred, his voice laced with mockery and invitation. "Take your father's place at my side." Luke's fingers twitched against his lightsaber hilt. There it was, the moment the Emperor had planned for, the moment he had seen in the boy's eyes. The spark of rage, the fear, the anger, the desperation. It was always the same. Vader had stood in this place before. He had known what it meant to stare down the impossible and choose the forbidden. And yet something had changed. He had been the weapon of the Sith for decades, but for the first time, hesitation crept into his mind. His son. Skywalker was young, but he had already walked closer to the abyss than he understood. The darkness was not a place one simply stepped into. It was a slow fall, a current that pulled and swallowed everything. Vader had been drowning in it for a lifetime. Luke ignited his saber, and so it began. Their blades clashed in the hollow vastness of the throne room, green against crimson, echoing through the chamber with each strike. Luke fought with passion, each swing driven by purpose, by desperation. Vader met him with cold precision, his strength still unmatched, his mastery unshaken. But there was something else, something Palpatine had not accounted for. Luke was faster. Vader felt it as their sabers locked, as his son pressed forward, each strike carrying weight beyond skill. This was not the same boy from Cloud City. This was a warrior forged in war, one who had stared death in the face and refused to fall. Palpatine watched, smiling. He could feel the rage beginning to build within Luke. Vader had known war for decades, but now, as the duel raged, the fight no longer felt like duty. It felt like something else entirely. He had dueled Jedi masters, slain rebels, crushed armies beneath his boots. But now, he was battling a son who refused to become what the galaxy had forced him to be. Luke's fury surged as he struck harder, his movements raw with emotion. Vader staggered under the weight of it. His mechanical breathing grew heavier. Then, the mistake. Luke's lightsaber found its mark, slashing across the control panel on Vader's chest. Sparks erupted, and for the first time, the Dark Lord faltered. He stumbled, his breath ragged, his body suddenly weaker. And then Luke saw it. The pain. For all his strength, all his terror, Vader was a man locked in a broken prison of metal and suffering. He had been shaped into a monster, but beneath it, there was something else. Something the Emperor had tried to erase. And that was when Luke stepped back. He could end it, strike him down, end the war with one fatal blow. The Emperor's laughter curled through the air, urging him forward, waiting for the moment of darkness to take hold. But Luke did not swing. He did not finish it. He shut down his lightsaber. "I am a Jedi," he said, his voice steady, "like my father before me." It was not defiance. It was truth. The words hung in the silence, and for the first time, Vader did not feel like the monster the galaxy feared. He felt small. He looked at Palpatine, the master who had controlled his fate for a lifetime, the Sith Lord who had taken everything from him, stolen his love, twisted his purpose, made him believe that there was nothing left of Anakin Skywalker. And then he looked at his son. The Emperor rose from his throne, his patience gone. The game was over. He had no more use for Vader. Lightning filled the room. Luke cried out as the power of the dark side coursed through him, his body writhing, his limbs convulsing. Palpatine's laughter turned to a snarl as he poured his hatred into the attack. "Now, young Skywalker," he hissed, "you will die." Vader watched. For years he had stood by and watched, as planets burned, as Jedi fell, as innocents screamed. He had watched and done nothing, because that was his role. That was what he had been made into. But this was different. This was his son. And suddenly, the chains broke. Vader moved before the thought had fully formed, before the fear of what it meant could stop him. His arms wrapped around the Emperor's frail frame, lifting him into the air. Palpatine screamed in fury, his lightning lashing out wildly, searing into Vader's armor, burning into his flesh, frying circuits, breaking the very machine that had kept him alive. But he did not stop. With the last of his strength, he hurled the Emperor into the abyss. The darkness screamed as Palpatine was swallowed by it, the energy exploding outward in a final surge of rage. Vader collapsed. His breathing was uneven, his body failing. Luke rushed to his side, his hands trembling as he reached for him. Vader's vision was fading, the weight of his own body crushing him. But for the first time in a lifetime, there was peace. Anakin Skywalker had returned. The throne room was silent except for the hum of two ignited lightsabers. Luke stood before Vader, his breath ragged, his hands gripping his weapon with renewed fury. His father loomed over him, blade raised, his dark presence an immovable wall. The battle was reaching its crescendo, and neither could retreat. Luke had fought enemies before, but none like this. The man before him was not just a foe. He was the specter of everything he had lost, the force that had cast a shadow over his life before he had even known his name. He was the hand that had taken Obi-Wan, the monster who had tortured his friends, the servant of the Emperor who had burned the galaxy to its knees. And yet, he was also his father. The weight of that truth burned within Luke, just as deeply as his anger. Vader struck first, a two-handed overhead blow that sent Luke staggering under the pressure. He had fought his father before on Cloud City, had felt the cold precision of a Sith Lord's power. But this was different. This was not a lesson in pain. This was Vader fighting to win. The strikes came harder, faster, relentless. Luke barely kept up, his body screaming in protest as he blocked and dodged, his blade meeting Vader's in bursts of green and red. Every move was fueled by something more than just the need to survive. Rage. It surged through him, hotter than he had ever felt before. Vader had taken too much. Leia's suffering, Han's imprisonment, the deaths of countless innocents, all orchestrated under his watch. The Emperor sat above them, watching, waiting, reveling in the chaos, his amusement curling in the dark corners of the room. And Luke's anger answered the call. His strikes grew wild, raw with unchecked fury. He forced Vader back, their battle shifting across the throne room. Sparks flew as their sabers slashed through metal railings, their movements blurs of energy and motion. Vader had always been the unshaken force, but now he was retreating, his defenses faltering beneath Luke's relentless assault. A blade swept too low. Vader barely leapt back in time. Another strike, and he stumbled. Then the mistake. Luke's saber came down like a hammer, slamming into Vader's wrist. The mechanical hand separated from his arm in a burst of sparks and shattered circuits, the lightsaber it held clattering down into the abyss below. Vader fell to his knees. Luke stood over him, his breath ragged, his saber humming at his side. The fight was over. The Dark Lord who had crushed the Jedi, who had hunted them to extinction, who had ruled with terror for decades, was kneeling, defeated, vulnerable. His father. Luke raised his lightsaber. One final stroke, one motion, and it would end. The galaxy would be free of Darth Vader. And then he saw it. The severed wires where Vader's hand had been, the exposed metal, the broken machine. And then he looked at his own hand, the one that had been replaced after Cloud City. A machine just like his father's. A warning. His hands trembled. Slowly the red haze of rage began to clear. His father knelt before him, breathing heavily, his body barely holding itself together. The Dark Lord, the enforcer of the Sith, was no longer the towering presence that had haunted Luke's nightmares. He was a broken man, trapped in the shell of a monster. The lightsaber in Luke's hands wavered. The choice was his, and in the end, there was no choice at all. He deactivated his weapon. The Emperor's laughter cut through the silence like a blade. It was not the amused chuckle of a ruler watching his subjects dance. It was something darker, something laced with venom. Palpatine rose from his throne, his hands folding beneath his sleeves, his golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Good," he purred, stepping forward. "Your hate has made you powerful." Luke turned, his expression defiant. "I will never join you." The Emperor smiled, and in that moment, Luke knew. Lightning filled the chamber. It struck without warning, tearing through Luke's body like fire. His limbs convulsed, his breath ripped from his lungs as the dark side of the Force consumed him in raw, unrelenting agony. Palpatine raised his hands, the power of the Sith radiating from his fingertips in searing bolts of blue energy. "So be it. Jedi." Luke crumpled to the floor, the pain overwhelming every thought, every breath, every ounce of resistance. Vader watched. For years he had stood and watched as the Emperor worked his cruelty upon the weak, the defenseless, the innocent. He had watched as Jedi fell before him, as rebels burned, as whole worlds were crushed under the iron grip of the Empire. He had watched, because that was all he had left. But now, it was his son. Palpatine did not stop. The laughter grew colder, the power intensified. Luke writhed, his screams echoing across the throne room, his body burning under the weight of the dark side's fury. Vader's hands clenched into fists. He had been a Sith for decades, had bent his knee to the Emperor, sworn himself to the darkness. He had believed there was no other path, no other choice, no future beyond the one Palpatine had carved for him. But this was different. This was his son. And suddenly the chains did not feel so strong. His breathing grew heavy. His fingers twitched. The choice had been made for him long ago, but for the first time in a lifetime, he made one of his own. The Dark Lord of the Sith turned. His master did not see it coming. Vader lunged, wrapping his arms around Palpatine's frail form, lifting him into the air. The lightning did not stop. It turned on him instead, burning into his armor, frying circuits, searing through flesh and metal alike. He did not stop. The Emperor's shriek filled the air as Vader stepped forward, carrying him toward the abyss. Palpatine fought, his claws raking against Vader's chestplate, but the Dark Lord did not release him. The lightning flared one final time. Then they were falling. The Emperor was swallowed by the void. Vader collapsed to his knees, his breathing labored, his body broken. And in that moment, Anakin Skywalker returned. The throne room was silent, but for the crackle of dying electricity. Smoke curled from the shattered remnants of the Emperor's throne. The Dark Lord of the Sith lay broken, his once indomitable frame trembling under its own weight. His black armor, once a symbol of terror, now felt impossibly heavy. Vader was dying. The Emperor was gone, cast into the abyss, his screams swallowed by the endless void below. The galaxy had feared him for decades, but in the end, he had not foreseen his own death at the hands of the one he had shaped, tormented, and bound in servitude. But Vader had not done it as a Sith. He had done it as a father. Luke was at his side in an instant, pulling him away from the edge, the weight of his father's failing body pressing against him. The younger Skywalker's breath came in short gasps, his body still aching from the lightning's torment. But none of that mattered now. Vader's voice, once a booming mechanical rasp, was weak. "Help me. Take this mask off." Luke hesitated. He had spent years imagining this moment, this victory. But it wasn't victory. His father was dying, and he knew that removing the helmet would end it. "But you'll die," he whispered. Vader, no, Anakin, looked at him, and for the first time in decades, there was something beyond cold calculation in his gaze. A father looking at his son, not through the red lenses of the monster, but with the quiet, desperate need of a man who wanted to see his child with his own eyes. "Nothing can stop that now." Luke obeyed. The hiss of depressurization filled the room as he detached the mask piece by piece, until at last, Anakin Skywalker lay before him. Not the towering shade of Darth Vader, not the specter of war, but a man. His face was pale, lined with scars, his skin gaunt and sickly. But his eyes, those were Anakin's eyes. Luke swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in his throat. His entire life, this had been his greatest enemy, the nightmare in the dark, the shadow of the Empire. But now, in his final moments, there was no Sith Lord, no legend, only a father saying goodbye to his son. Anakin gave the faintest of smiles. "You were right." His voice was barely more than a whisper. "You were right about me." Tears blurred Luke's vision. "Father, I won't leave you." Anakin's hand, shaking, found his son's. "You already have." A slow exhale, a final breath. The weight of decades, of war, of suffering, lifted. Anakin Skywalker was free. The Death Star burned. Its ruins spiraled into the void, consumed by its own arrogance. The Emperor was gone, the iron grip of the Sith broken. Across the galaxy, the Empire faltered, and for the first time in a generation, the stars seemed a little brighter. But even in death, the shadow of Darth Vader remained. His name had shaped an era, carved into the very bones of the galaxy. Planets had trembled at the sound of his breath. His blade had ended empires, crushed rebellions, and rewritten the fate of worlds. He was more than a man. He had become something greater, something far more terrifying. And yet, in his final moments, he had undone it all. Anakin Skywalker was dead, but the myth of Darth Vader would never truly die. Luke carried his father's body to Endor, the weight of it more than just flesh and armor. It was history. It was burden. It was legacy. The Jedi had been all but extinguished, yet here, at the end of all things, the prophecy had been fulfilled. The Chosen One had brought balance, not in the way the Jedi had once imagined, but in the only way it had ever truly been possible, by walking through the fire and coming out the other side. The funeral pyre crackled in the night. The black armor, once an unbreakable prison, now nothing more than hollow metal and dying embers. Smoke rose into the sky, carried by the wind, as if the darkness itself was being lifted from the galaxy. The flames consumed Darth Vader, but not Anakin. Anakin had already been set free, and yet, even as the flames died, the legend remained. Across the stars, whispers would grow. Some would tell of the monster in black, the enforcer of the Empire, the scourge of the Jedi. Others would speak of the fallen knight, the warrior who had been deceived, enslaved, and ultimately redeemed. The truth would blur with time, becoming myth, becoming warning. Children would hear his story and shudder. Fathers would tell their sons that if they strayed too far into darkness, they would hear the breathing of the Sith Lord in the shadows. But Luke would remember something else. Standing among his friends, among the new hope of the rebellion, he turned away from the dying fire and saw them, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and standing beside them, whole, unbroken, was Anakin Skywalker. Not Vader, not a Sith, a Jedi. For all his failures, for all his sins, Anakin had found his way home. And as Luke looked into his father's face, into the quiet peace there, he knew the truth. Even the darkest soul could find the light again.